Hello, and welcome to the Ratchet 3 Up Your Arsenal Beginner Speedrun Guide. I'm Chili, and I'm going to be walking you through some of the beginner strats, the beginner route that I've recorded, and just hopefully answering a few questions along the way. Just to start off with a little intro, I've got a few questions that you might be curious if you're getting into UYA before we even get into the run. So the first question is, which category should I run? You come over to speedrunning.com. You see we've got 6 categories on the leaderboard. And really the only category I can recommend for beginners is New Game Plus, no QE, no quit exploit. For the simple reason that this is already quite a hard category. This is a very difficult speed game, and everything else is even harder. With the exception of New Game Plus with quit exploit. The reason I don't recommend that for a beginner is because it's more boring, honestly. About half the run is Marcadia, and a lot of people would consider Marcadia to be the most boring planet in the run. So I just do not recommend that for a beginner. You might be tempted because it's a little bit shorter, but trust me, NG Plus no QE is where you want to be getting started. That might raise the question, what is QE? QE stands for quit exploit. And I don't want to get into too much detail, but basically what it allows you to do is mess up the game's memory and put items into the vendor shops that shouldn't be there. And so for what you would do in a beginner QE run is when you get to Marcadia, this is showing an old route from an old world record. You can see Zem has some items that shouldn't be in the shop. These are actually the gravity boots and the master plan. So the master plan is what you get on Crash Site, and it gives you the coordinates to Quark's hideout, which is the third last planet in the game. So it allows you to skip a large majority of the game, and that's why it's so much shorter run. If you are at top level, you do a trick called early LDF. I 100,000,000% would not recommend that for a beginner. Probably the hardest trick in the whole Ratchet and Clank series. You can run NG Plus with quit exploit. I'm not going to stop you. I don't think it's the way you should start. Hi, Future Chili here. I realized I didn't actually explain how to do quit exploit. It's really simple. All you do is you go to options, quit game, yes, go back to the main menu. And it happens if you have a certain amount of bolts, a certain amount of playtime on your file, and a certain number of challenge mode runs on your file. And depending on those values, that's why it ends up putting in the vendor. So the next point I want to get on to is please, please, please watch this video first. Watch Kerpling's movement guide. It's amazing. I know it's quite long, but there's a lot of things you need to learn in this game. Just get comfortable with at least the basics. Neutral long jumps, falling neutral jumps, whip jumps, and turret clips. You're not going to get anywhere without all of those. A quick note on version differences, because there are quite a few different versions you can run this game on. So the most optimal, and what I will recommend, is to run on a PlayStation 3 and download it, put an SSD hard drive into your PS3 and get the downloaded version of Ratchet and Clank 3 and run it on that. So when you download the game, it loads a lot faster compared to playing off a disc. And if you put an SSD in your PS3, that will also save you about a minute on loads. It depends how good your hard drive was. It's a bit of a lottery how good your hard drive is. I know personally my hard drive was probably losing me about a minute and a half before I got an SSD. If you're a complete beginner, no real need to get an SSD, but it's something to consider further down the line once you want to compare yourself to others on the leaderboard. So then below PS3 with a SSD, then PS3 with a hard drive is the second best option. Probably the third best option is PS3 on a disc. These days there are so many strats that are PS3 exclusive. So even though a disc is very slow, it's a good place to get started into the PS3 strats. If you only have a PS2, you really need to get an NTSC PS2, as in an American region PS2. If you have a PAL PS2, the game runs at 50 hertz instead of 60 hertz, which means the charge boots move slower and it ruins everything pretty much. So really avoid PAL PS2 if you can. Avoid PS2 in general if you can. One note again on PS2 is that turret clips work differently. So if you're playing on PS2, don't copy any advice I give for turret clips, because it just doesn't make sense for PS2. And then you can run this game on Vita. Vita is actually very fast, but no one really wants to run on Vita. So again, Vita works very similarly to PS3, so you should be fine there. Getting a file or setting up a file. So I would absolutely recommend, well, for one, joining the Discord. Get in the Ratchet and Clank Discord, and lots of useful people there, but they also have a few resources, one of which is the community save files. And this means you can get ready to do New Game Plus runs without having to set up your own file. And the one you want to get is this Ratchet and Clank Up Your Arsenal, PAL PS3, can be used for regular no queue runs or NG Plus QE runs. And you download that, and you have to do something called re-signing. There's a tutorial somewhere, I think up here, about how to re-sign your file so it'll work on your PS3. It's all pretty straightforward. It's a lot easier than making your own file. However, if you do want to make your own file, I mean, just list out everything that you'll need. Number one, you need to turn your quick select pause off. So hang on, if we quickly go into the run. So you'll see I'll bring up my quick select pause after this fight. Well, my quick select, and when I'm equipping weapons, the game's not pausing. If you remember when you play it casually, every time you hold down triangle, the game will pause. The way you set this up is by starting a multiplayer game and then making a new file, and that will turn off quick select pause. So that's the first thing you need. And then the weapons you need, if we can, version 8 shot cannon, version 8 shield charger, version 4 Rhino. It's very important that it's not higher than version 4, otherwise it will break up. It won't let you do a trick called Rhino bombing. Version 8 plasma rifle, version 8 nitro launcher, version 8 mega turrets, version 8 plasma coil, version 8 rift ripper. Those are all the weapons you need, and you can lay them out in any order you like. I would personally recommend shield on top. This is because this is the input you'll accidentally do sometimes, and equipping shield is a lot worse than equipping another weapon that you don't want. And then I don't lay it out like this purely from muscle memory from the old days, but I would recommend in your 4 left, right, down directions, you want to have the turrets, you want to have the shot cannon, and you want to have the whip. These are like the most common weapons that you use all the time, and so you want to be able to input them as easily as possible. Everything else can kind of go wherever you want. One of them will have to go onto the second ring as well. I have the Rift Ripper on the second ring, but you quite easily put like the Plasma Coil on the second ring. You don't use that too much either. Hey, Future Chili again. I just forgot to mention the second ring of the quick select. What you want to have is first person mode, PDA, and third person mode, as well as the other weapon that didn't fit on the first ring. In terms of other things that you'll need the Infernox armor, the top level armor. It's not just so you don't die. It actually has different properties to do with charging off ledges, which I'll explain further down the line. You need the charge boots, quite obviously. You want to have the PDA, which we use for one strat on a Banu Draco. Avoid getting the box breaker because it can mess up certain strats when there's a couple of times we want to jump on a box. And so if you use the box breaker, you might accidentally break those boxes before you can get to them. And then finally, your ship type should be, let's get a nice pause frame when it's coming across. This type with the split nose. This isn't a big deal, but the split nose has a slightly smaller hitbox, and so it's easier to not bonk on the split nose ship compared to all the other ones. Occasionally it will make a difference. It's not a huge deal, but if you get the community save file, this will all be done for you. So that's why I really recommend getting the community save file. It's a lot easier than going through a file, getting all of that stuff, because that's quite a lot to remember. What's next in my notes? Racman is a practice tool that runs on your computer, connects to your PS3. And it lets you do so many things that are really useful for practice. So you can save and load your position. You can give yourself infinite ammo. Give yourself Ghost Ratchet. You can make it so you never die. You can load all the different planets. And you can get an input display, which is how I've done the input display for my round. It will make your life a lot easier. Again, I'll have a link to it in the description, I guess. But the best way to learn how to install it is through the Discord. So again, get yourself in the Discord as well. I'll put a link to the Discord for sure in the description. Those two resources together, Racman and the Discord, that should cover anything that I forgot to cover throughout this whole video. Okay, and then so the very last thing is what do you need to do before you start a session of runs. So some of these are very important, some of these are really not that important at all. The thing that you'll notice whenever you watch a run is that we run in German, and we run in German for a couple of reasons. The most importantly is it allows us to do a trick called Quarp, which we'll get into in a little bit. And then secondly is you could also run in Spanish, I believe, and get Quarp, but German is a little bit faster in a couple of places where there's some dialogue. That's why we run in German. That is the most important thing. Every time you open up the game, it doesn't save your language, so you've got to go into settings and set it to German. The other important thing to do before you start your runs is called act tuning. Act tuning is a mechanic in the game from the days before they had difficulty settings, or at least difficulty settings weren't completely commonplace. Act tuning works on every single boss, and what it means is every time you die on the boss gets a little bit easier. For some reason on Clank and Nefarious, it carries between your save files, so you can act tune once and then it's set up for all your future runs on that session. So you need to go to Clank and you need to go to Nefarious and you need to die to the boss 10 times. Thankfully, Racman has this handy button called Setup No QE. Setup No QE will do pretty much everything that I'm about to tell you for you, again, which is why I really recommend getting Racman. It's just turns setting up your runs from a 10-minute thing into a 1-second thing. The other thing you want to do is called menu storage. The PS3 version, I believe this doesn't work on PS2. The PS3 version has a property where it will remember where you were on a menu. So we have a point where we go into the vid comics, and we have to open the pause menu. So that you're hovering over end, you'll normally be hovering over this top one, which is, I believe, continue in English. So that means you can just mash X to get through this menu rather than having to go up an X. It's a minor thing. Definitely not as big as tuning. None of these other things are as big as tuning at all. Again, a very minor thing is that on Command Center, the first time you visit it, there'll be what's called a help desk, which blocks makes you have to input an extra triangle input when you're trying to change weapons. So if you go to Command Center and press triangle, it removes it, and for some reason it removes it on every single file. Normally help desks don't disappear. This help desk text does disappear, so that's the other thing. And then finally, the very first time you load up Veldin on a file, it will play an extra cutscene. Just load up a file with Veldin, and then you can start your runs. It saves a good 3 to 5 seconds, I believe. So you really don't want that cutscene in your runs. And just quickly a note on how we do this. If I go to the beginning, we always load from a file. What you want to have to do is something called an anchor file, which is a file that you never actually do your runs on. And then you want to copy your anchor file onto all your other slots, and then you run on the other slots. And then once you've filled up all those slots with runs, go back to your anchor file, copy from the anchor file again. That way you're never losing your anchor file, because you need a fresh Veldin file to run from. the most important thing that the mods will be looking for when they're verifying your run is that you get this text which says welcome to challenge mode at the start. If you haven't done this, if they're not seeing this text box, it means you've already gone somewhere in the file. You might have activated a cutscene, skipped a cutscene, something like that. But you are allowed to do anything before this point. So right at the start of the run, you can equip your charge boots, you can set up your quick select, you can do all that and then save the game. That is legal. We came to a decision as a community that having the menuing at the start of every single run to do that was a bit frustrating and made resetting worse. So you can set up your quick select exactly like how you like it, equip your charge boots, and then save the game, and that is your Anchor file. Don't touch it after that. Okay, I believe that is it. So we can actually get started on the run.